What's up, everybody? Thank you all so much for tuning into this live stream interview. And I, of course, am your humble host, Niko House, but I have a very, very special guest with me today. She is running for Tulsi Gabbard's seat for the Congressional District number 2 in Hawaii. Today I have with me Noelle Famera. How are you doing, Noelle? Thanks for joining us.
Good. Thank you for having me.
No
How are you
problem at
doing?
all. I'm doing good. I can't complain. I can't complain. I'm sure you have a pretty full plate right now. I'm not
Yes.
gonna lie. We gotta start where everybody's gonna ask me to start anyway. So because I know why half these people came here. These people are gonna want to know: are you running on some of the policies that have become so popularized from a certain congressional candidate from that district? And how would you want to see, how would you be able to take advantage of a seat that, if you're running on the right policies from that particular congresswoman, like how would you take advantage of that in a potential victory heading to Congress?
Well, see, Tulsi and I agree on a lot of the same policies. So for me, coming in and basically picking up the torch seems logical to me in terms of the sensibility of policy. So for me, I was actually involved in the universal basic income before Tulsi had gotten on board with it.
Mm.
And then I think when she got on board with it, it just really made this Aloha gang and this, Yang gang really come together in terms of how we can transition policy at a congressional level.
Mm.
And so it's brought a lot of awareness to the power of Congress and the representatives that stand in line with the policies that um, Tulsi also stands for, which is like universal basic income, climate change action, and data rights, and so forth.
Yeah, data rights is a huge issue right now. And I think it's crazy because I feel like it's a huge issue. It's constantly being discussed in the background, but not really being brought to the forefront. And so I'm glad that you are one of the very few congressional candidates. I noticed that a lot of former Yang Gang type of candidates have been definitely talking about that a lot. So when you get to Congress, one of the things that you're going to have to deal with is basically what seems like a foreign policy doctrine that requires you, like we saw over 100 Democrats do today, vote for overinflated budgets or refuse to reduce any of these overinflated budgets. We just saw the Pentagon 10% reduction fail in the House, in a House that is dominated by Democrats, right? So how are you going to navigate this murky Capitol Hill that basically punishes you seemingly for trying to be anti-war, trying to spend that money in ways that benefit the people rather than the military-industrial complex?
Well, of course, when I get into Congress, I'll have more information than which is given to me right now. So I'll be able to make better, more informed decisions. But I look at it as negotiating. If we can negotiate with our counterparts, the Republicans, then we can find solutions. What you see in Congress right now is a lot of division. We see it in the country as well. And I think if we can work on our negotiation skills, we can actually get things passed that help people. The problem is you have Congress approving these budgets, and a universal basic income basically solves all those problems without creating this inflation and this bubble and this economic turmoil that we may not be able to get ourselves out of.
Mm-hmm.
So if we're going to approve a $3 million or $3 trillion budget, it just doesn't make sense that we would give it all to these corporations and give one check to American citizens. So transitioning the trickle up effect will hopefully wrap around the heads of people in Senate and Congress in the next year. With me in Congress, I'm not going to let it go. So we're going to have to find a way to negotiate, and we'll see what happens when I get there, how that is going to play out
Well,
with
I'm
my
glad that you
colleagues.
are, you're principled in your stance on UBI and making sure that we are trying to approach things from a perspective of negotiation, because politics, no matter what, is a give and take situation. But like I said, just like with foreign policy specifically, these people are taking money. And so a lot of the division that we have seen isn't a real ideological division. It is more so a manufactured division
Absolutely.
that has been
Yes.
bought. So
Thank you for saying that.
how do you negotiate with somebody who has basically been paid money specifically not to hear what you have to say?
So, I think you can't always focus on what one individual is saying. This is a democracy and how we're going to shift the policies here. Um, my opponent definitely uses money to,
He's taking corporate
you know,
money.
yeah, to not get my voice heard. So it's not something that I'll be new to. You just have to scream louder and you have to fight harder. Um, Now, that opposition of what I call a kleptocracy, which is people doing these shady deals with the federal funds, and excuse me, that my I have a person cutting the lawn right now.
You're all good.
So when you have people that aren't willing to cut the budget, you have people not willing to look at the facts. You have this problem that we're having. It's this foreign invasion, people not being accountable for what's being spent, and we're in a national crisis right now. So the national crisis that's happening within our Constitution right now is that the abuse of power on every level. Mm-hmm. Now, how do you stop the abuse of power? How do you stop the cronies? How do you stop the kleptocrats? You have to have representatives that are going to hold them accountable. And we're seeing Congress hold individuals accountable for their disinformation, misinformation. But I believe it's going to take time for us to get out of this. I don't think it's going to be one snap of finger and everything's going to be solved. And that's we're going to have to maneuver through, and what I'm going to have to maneuver through.
I would agree. Now, there are a lot of skeptics out there, given everything that's taken place during the 2019 and 2020 primary season, and even what we're seeing taking place here. Basically, they feel like, especially given the recent protests and the change that has come about because of them, that politics is kind of a tired way of trying to get things changed. If you want something changed, a lot of people are beginning to feel like, well, it has to be done from the outside, because ultimately you will be corrupted if you actually end up getting in office. What would your response be to that?
That's what I'm afraid of. Like, that's what a lot of people say to me, and I hope that my victory will restore faith in our government. That's what I hope. That's what I'm. Obviously things are going to come in that are going to try to influence me, and that's why I've been very adamant about having taking no PAC money and being fully sponsored by the people as a grassroots movement. And yeah, you're absolutely right. That's always in the back of my head.
Well, I can tell you as a person who's had a lot of money thrown his way, I'm telling you, it's just way too hard to be corrupt. So don't even, it just would take way too much energy. You got to remember every lie you're told, everybody you made a promise to. It's just easier to
Exactly. That's why I'm not in the pockets of anybody. So that way I'm not beholden to someone else's agenda. So I'm not going to have the same problems that other people have in Congress, because I'm not in the pockets of anyone. And I made that part of my foundation for my campaign when I started this, that I wouldn't take PAC money and I wouldn't take money from corporations that are exploiting people.
I will tell you this too, just from my experience in helping out with people's campaigns and things like that. The other thing that helps people stay on the straight and narrow is having the right people around you, because you can do all the things, you can really genuinely want the things that are best for this country and the people, but you get the wrong person around you. And you can be misguided. I mean, to be quite frank, we saw Bernie Sanders' chief advisor literally start a super PAC as soon as the election was over, which means that he was never really, especially towards the end when things were looking more bleak, he wasn't advising him based off of what was best for the campaign or Bernie Sanders or even the people. It was based off of the next career move. So if you have people around you who are not thinking about the next career move rather than, or more than worried about making sure that you succeed in the missions that you want to accomplish, and making sure that those missions, of course, are for the benefit of the people,
Absolutely.
then that's
Absolutely.
like, that's a surefire way. I've seen people be able to stay afloat like that in local office. That having the right people behind you is like, it's massive. So,
That's why we're here today, because my team has been so great. I would not be here without them.
that's good
Every
stuff.
person who's contributed has helped to keep the sanity together, has kept me going stronger, that we can bring change. We are doing it. Change is coming, and our coalition that we've built is being heard. And I think when that's reinforced to me, it shows that, people are listening, and that you don't have to have this corruption behind you to get
Yeah.
into office, that you can actually get into office by being supported by people, and good people with an agenda to reshape the country in a more prosperous vision.
So another big hot button issue right now, for obvious reasons, is healthcare. Where do you stand on the conversation of healthcare? Are you a single payer person? Are you a public option person, or a private option person, or are you just some people are just pro ACA? They just want to build upon that? Which category would you put yourself in?
Well, that's a great question. A lot of people ask me about healthcare. And so I'm not necessarily for a Medicare for all. The concept is really, really great. And I think the foundations and what that was built on is comprehensive, in the sense that it wants to help people. The problem is, if we have a government funded healthcare, that limits the ability to have control over your body. And so I
Can
personally
you
don't.
delve a little bit deeper into that? Because I'm curious. I haven't really heard this particular argument before, so I'm
Yeah.
curious. What do you
Yeah.
mean?
So I'm specifically an advocate for approving a Medicare for all, but only with alternative health care implemented into it, meaning that not one type of medicine is dictating
Oh,
our
so like
health care.
Tulsi Single Payer Plus plan actually allocated funds specifically for alternative medicine, holistic medicine. It's like a certain allotment every year that you have to spend on medicine. Some people's religions prevent them from seeing certain types of doctors and things like that. Is that what you're referring to?
So yes, that's
Got
an
you.
example. So I look at healthcare as wellness care, not sick care. And we have a system, and Marianne Williamson put it into great um, perception to the American people when she said, we have a sick care system, not an actual wellness or healthcare system.
Mm-hmm.
We focus on treating the symptom and not curing the cause. And so when you have all these pharmaceutical companies, because that's why Bernie basically introduced this, was because to stop the pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies from exploiting the people and racking up these high bills that are putting people into astronomical debt and making them go bankrupt.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to look at why it's this way. It's this way because of the special interests, the
Yeah.
invested interests of pharmaceutical industries, chemical companies, and so forth, that has made the population sick. So what we need to do is implement an actual healthcare system that implements how we can heal in other ways: alternative medicine, Chinese medicine, natural birthing, homeopathic medicine, and even physical fitness and massage therapy, acupuncture. They all need to be implemented into our healthcare system. And
Mm.
I'm not really interested in approving a Medicare for all without that.
Yeah.
And because I believe that only a government dictating a healthcare policy in one direction isn't free will. It's actually controlling people. And that's where the scary thing is with a Medicare for all, without having the proper legislation in place to obtain other types of health care.
So with
So,
Medicare for all specifically, you're right. That is a very legitimate critique. And like the
so if it
single
came to
payer,
me, I would amend it.
huh?
So if the bill came to me, I would want to amend it with that
Yeah.
alternative health care.
Actually, that was well. The argument that you have is actually one of the reasons why Tulsi decided she wanted to introduce a single payer plus plan, because she wanted there to be a base where everyone was paying into it. However, you would have options, and
Absolutely.
you could conform your plans and your needs based off of what you believe in and what's worked for you and things like that. And I did feel like that was something that actually really needed to be addressed, because to a
Yeah.
large degree, you are right. There are certain limitations that you have in place, for all the benefits of Medicare for all. For example, I know somebody who actually just went to acupuncture, and it worked out very well for them.
Yeah.
Medicare for all obviously wouldn't cover that. I know people who go to chiropractors religiously. Medicare for all would not cover that, and so that is something that should be addressed. And I do agree that whoever, whenever the discussion is brought back up, which I imagine will probably be in the next session, I do
Yeah.
believe that there should be a way to maintain options within that system. So I agree.
Yes. So
So
I try not to go yes or no with Medicare, and I really appreciate you giving me a platform to explain the alternative health care that I want to amend
So you do
into
believe
it.
in, but so it sounds like you do believe in single payer, but you want more
Correct.
options, like want people to have more options, but you don't like the Medicare for all that was introduced in the Senate by Bernie Sanders, basically that specific piece of legislation without amendments.
Correct. Correct.
Okay, sounds good. So I do want to ask you one more question. Foreign policy. Foreign policy is obviously it's crazy right now. I want to go into all the nitty gritty, but generally, how would you govern or legislate, I should say, in Congress? Um, are you? I don't want to say. What do they always say? I don't even want to say progressive on foreign policy, because progressive on foreign policy isn't necessarily good enough. I'm not going to lie to you. But are you going to be kind of a hands-off type of person? Are you going to be one that focuses on reallocating the resource that we have to make sure they're being spent the right way? Are you a sometimes interventionist when it's right? Not an interventionist. I mean, unless it is absolutely 100% necessary. Where do you stand on that issue?
So currently, I don't have information that the from the Department of Homeland Security and the Pentagon and things like this. So I don't have the full details on all of our foreign policy around the world right now. But I will tell you, my stance is non-intervention and peace, and how we can work diplomacy to avoid conflict at every turn possible.
I'm gonna tell you this:
However,
even
there
after the
are
Department of
some.
Homeland Security gives you the information, you should probably maintain that principle, because
Absolutely.
the information they're gonna give you is
Absolutely.
gonna be literally created to make you not want to maintain that principle.
Well, we also have hostile regimes out there that we need to also, um, nurture. I want to nurture these other countries more than just invade, obviously. Um,
What do you mean
I
by
don't want to
nurture?
invade
What do
any
you what do
countries.
you
I want
mean
to
by
pull
that?
them out. I want to pull our troops back home. I don't think they have any business over there doing Saudi Arabia's work. You know, there's a lot of deals going on right now within the military industrial complex that's wasted resources, wasted money, and I would not continue this. And a lot of my foreign policy is putting on more restrictions and sanctions on Russia and the election interference that has led us to a very tyrannical leader. And I think it's essential that we create a way to protect ourselves from foreign invasion. And what that foreign invasion consists of in terms of weapons, in terms of cybersecurity, terrorism, and all of this. So I personally don't have all the information to everything, but I do know that um, part of my goal is to eliminate about $150 billion from the military budget.
Per
Will
year?
it be passed? I don't know, but I will work towards it and put that funding towards education and sustainability and other things.
So you mentioned sanctions against Russia. My question would be, though, sanctions have actually, at least U.S. initiated sanctions, have only proven to hurt not the
Yeah,
government, not the rich people, but only
yeah.
poor people and working class. So would you, even if we accepted the premise that Russia did hack the elections, would we be achieving our goal? Because, like you said, if you considered Russia a hostile regime, then it would be better to work with them diplomatically or nurture them, as you put it. And sanctions would only really increase anti-U.S.
Escalate
sentiment.
it. Correct. Absolutely. Sanctions are not what we want to do. It doesn't, but what it does stop is them being kleptocrats and stealing money from our government to hack us and invade us. So what these sanctions do is say, stop our country, stop buying from Russia. So,
but we've implemented sanctions on them. So we've implemented sanctions on them, Ari. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Yes.
But now
Yes.
they're also being accused, allegedly, of stealing a vaccine, which is not really a really hostile move. If they could get it done, I would be fine with it. I just want people to not die. That's my main concern. But but if you take the allegations as being true, then technically the sanctions didn't work, and really all of our relations with Russia have become more tense abroad since the sanctions have been implemented. So, are you sure that?
Really like, yeah.
Go ahead.
I would really like to have the information on what from our actual leaders in terms of our military on the best action, what to do. And I would obviously look towards our intelligence community on what the best actions would do, because obviously sanctions aren't working. They're still
the intelligence community was the ones who suggested the sanctions. The reason I ask is because if you take what the intelligence community says to be true, when the intelligence community had to retract the fact that there was quote unquote 17 agencies unanimously agreeing that Russia hacked the elections, that was retracted. It didn't make a lot of news headlines, but New York Times did have to retract that article. They've made mistake after mistake after mistake as of late, at least over the last 4 years. And it's led to, for example, us bombing Syria, and we killed innocent people there. And it turns out that the attack that was alleged to be committed by Assad never actually happened. And so that's why I'm curious if we shouldn't be leading with primarily first, second, third, fourth, and fifth diplomacy. And if we can't do things diplomatically, sometimes it might just be best to say, you know what, let's see how things work out with our allies. Let's leverage them in their relationship with these countries, because generally speaking, the moment you go into sanctions, historically speaking, the only people who suffer are the poor people.
The people. Yeah. And I just wish we had other ways to get this under control. And I think that's why so many people saw Hillary Clinton was talking about war with Russia in the 2016 election. And at that point, they had information that wasn't given to the American people on the extent of what Russia was doing. And so we all essentially voted for Trump, so we didn't go to war with Russia.
A lot of people did feel like that, yeah.
But what we lost was our democracy. And now we have a tyrant.
When you say we lost our democracy, what do you mean by that?
You have a full manipulation of the American people going on with the, what is it? It's called, not McCarthyism. It's the
neo-McCarthyist movement? Or you mean the opposite?
You have the McCarthyism from one side. People are saying, oh, you're McCarthyism when you're talking about Russia. And I'm talking about Machiavellian techniques here, where the Republicans and the Russians are using mass manipulation and misinformation to deter from the facts. And when you look at history, Russia was really involved with what was going on in Afghanistan in the 90s. And we were working out diplomacy with them. And we had some conflicts between the fall of the Soviet and then becoming a democracy. Mm-hmm. And I think whatever Bill was doing at that time was creating a more U.S. control, I guess, in that part of the world.
Oh, he was definitely trying to get some U.S. control. That's definitely
and I think that they didn't want Hillary Clinton to win, and so they did whatever they could, because that would mean like another Clinton in there, more conflicts. So
So I do have a question because you mentioned Machiavellian techniques. So
Machiavelli,
essentially speaking, the reason I don't know if you ever got to read the OIG report, the Office of Inspector General report,
yes,
regarding that entire situation. But the Office of Inspector General, who was not a fan of Trump by any means, admitted that basically, and the actual Robert Mueller report, but let's just stick to this, the OIG report. They admitted that really none of the claims by Comey or Andrew McCabe were substantiated. Also, McCabe and Comey both had a lot of conflict of interest where they were directly connected to Hillary and could directly benefit from her winning. For example, Andrew McCabe's wife was being heavily funded by Hillary Clinton's number one guy, Terry McAuliffe, in Virginia to run for office, and she was like the most highly funded candidate in the entire country for a local Virginia office, which was kind of insane to think about, but that's where we were. And so
yeah,
when
absolutely.
Hillary Clinton engaged in that type of corruption, and on top of that, engaged in the Uranium One scandal, where she worked with Ukraine, or the oligarchs of Ukraine, I should say, worked with the Clinton Foundation, which she should have never had to begin with as Secretary of State, and then they sold 20% of our nuclear uranium to Russia. Wouldn't that instead be the Machiavellian tactic to blame
Absolutely.
your
Absolutely.
opponent on what you are actually guilty of, which is she did in fact steal the election. Donna Brazile admitted this. Working with Russia, she did in fact work with Russia to undermine our democracy, so to speak, at least on the economic side.
So the U.S. works with Russia. Not so. I like to confirm that the United States of America works with Russia. So
For
Russia
what?
has information within our own policies, and our elected officials are doing
Mm-hmm.
deals and diplomacy with them. What's happening is what I believe is the invasion of both parties, the division, because when you look at the way our country is being shifted, we're people are waking up, people are consciously becoming more aware of what the problems are, and the problem isn't just one political party. It's not just the Democrats are bad and they were corrupt, and just the Republicans are bad and they're corrupt. Corruption doesn't care what political party you're a part of. If it can exploit it, it will do it. And that's what we're seeing Russia do to our country on both sides of the aisle.
It's just a
So
really
they're working
interesting
with
take
Republicans
because
and
it's
with
just it's
Democrats.
so the reason I just considered an interesting take is because all the facts just don't really point to that. And it seems
They
like
do, though. If you sit through the impeachment trials, you
oh,
sit through
trust
everything.
me. Unfortunately, I sat through all the impeachment
I
trials were actually even worse because Joe Biden was the one
investigate.
who actually threatened the Ukrainian government to sanction them. Literally, exactly what they accused
Yeah,
Trump of doing. He was the one who actually what they accused Trump is actually guilty of, or he is guilty of impeachable offenses, but they have nothing to do with what that impeachment trial was about. The problem was Joe Biden began to run, and they had to use some type of deflection tactic because, well, Joe Biden was actually guilty of what they accused Trump of. And if they actually wanted to solve the problem, they could have solved it in 5 minutes by calling the Ukrainian president to come and sit down, who's a progressive, by the way, to come, who doesn't like Trump, come testify. Because the Ukrainian president said, none of the things that y'all claim happened. None of them, like nothing. It was a pretty casual conversation, and he doesn't like Trump. So if at that point, why wouldn't they just call him to be a witness? And it's because they didn't want him to be there, because then
well,
he would
they
he would
say
tell the
he
truth
was being
about
influenced by Russia. He
say
was
that
being
again.
he was being influenced. The president of Ukraine was being influenced by Russia, and so they wanted to keep him as diplomatic as possible, and they felt that bringing him in would
How is he being
maybe
influenced by
create.
Russia? Based off of what? I'm
Oh,
sure that
Putin, by
he does
Putin.
take
They were
Russia into consideration. He should. They're like right. They're neighbors. They have such a
well. He's
tumultuous
our best
relationship.
hope for creating, diplomacy. So I think they didn't want to subject him to that type of interrogation, and it maybe hurt our chances of working with diplomacy with
So the
Russia.
last president of the Ukraine wasn't influenced by anybody.
Oh, I thought you were talking about this,
No,
the
I'm talking
current
about
one.
this one too, but we can't say that based off of basically nothing that this one is influenced by Russia, but the other
No, I'm
president
not saying he's
wasn't.
influenced by Russia. I'm saying that he's an advocate for creating diplomacy with the US and Russia. And
Yes,
that's what we're
that's
all
true.
hoping for. And that's why we didn't want to bring him into this investigation, was because we can still keep, without bringing him into our political issues, we can still use the Ukrainian president for diplomacy. And he's working with Putin to help with all of this. So I believe that, over time in peace treaties is also a good direction to go. Um, Objective from sanctions. Sanctions are if it's really hostile. You don't really want to go to that level, but you want to create a peace treaty to some extent to stop this type of invasion in all of our political sphere. So this is where I'm saying it's not just the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. It's in the FBI. It's in the CIA. It's in all of our institutions.
Mm-hmm.
So it takes out. It's like an infestation. So how do you get rid of the infestation? You have to, treat it. And how do you treat it? By recognizing where the issues are and holding people accountable for it. Trump has been linked to all of his campaign advisors and everything are felons, convicted of felonies, and conspiring with Russia.
I mean, with that same, but at the same time, Hillary is also, she wasn't found guilty, but James Comey did say you literally got, or not, excuse me, not Comey. They found out that assets for the United States were literally exposed because of what Hillary Clinton did with her email server,
I'm not saying
and that she was actually guilty, but she didn't mean to be guilty, so it's a little bit different. And then she once again was also connected to Russia through backdoor Russian influence through all her people too. Her chief advisor he owned 50,000 shares in Russia's energy company. Like that is the main energy company for Russia now, and he didn't sell them really until they thought Hillary was going to win, and he profited heavily because of that, because he was literally and so Russia's energy company, her chief advisor owns 50,000 shares. Oh, I can use my influence to get 20% of sell 20% of our uranium to Russia, who primarily benefits from that. Her circle, quite literally. So there could be an argument made that Russia actually stood more to gain from Hillary Clinton being president than Donald Trump being president, because basically his power is limited to whatever he.
But this is the Machiavellian stuff I'm talking about. They're playing both of them, and I don't care about either one of them. I want them all out of there. I want a whole new legislator.
The reason I brought it up is because you talked about accountability, which I 100% agree. We have to hold people account and be able to diagnose the infestation and treatment. Absolutely. But if we misdiagnose, then you treat the arm when it's actually your leg that's burning off. You could end up losing everything. And that's why I just wanted to go ahead and clarify what I meant by that. I do believe that there is a high level of corruption on all parties. Don't get me wrong. The oligarchs from the United States and the oligarchs from from Russia and the oligarchs from Ukraine, and the EU, I'm sure they all work hand in hand. But that is that's a separate problem than the diplomacy side, the political side of Russia. Well, not a separate problem, but it's an issue that has to be diagnosed separately, because there are just diametrically different solutions for that than there would be for a legitimate diplomatic breakdown that isn't really based in what most would consider to be an imaginary conspiracy theory at this point. Because with all the political winds at their back, they could have taken Trump down if they had an inkling of evidence. And they did have plenty of evidence for a lot of other things to impeach him with. The Syria stuff, the Yemen stuff. I mean, there's a lot there. And they chose not to touch the Iran assassination of Soleimani. All of this stuff they could have used. They chose not to even mention it, talk about it, touch it, or include it in any of the articles. And yet, I'm supposed to believe a conspiracy theory that even with all of the advantages at your back, you still couldn't prove in court. So at that point, maybe like you said, when it comes to diagnosing the right, diagnosing the problem correctly, we have to make sure we're diagnosing the problem correctly. And I don't think the problem is another country. I think at the end of the day, the problem is us. And if we don't go into any, at the local level, at the highest levels of, congressional office or Senate, if we don't recognize that and hold a mirror up to us, we can't really tell with any accuracy who is actually guilty of whatever they're guilty of, because in some way, form, or fashion, Russia may act hostilely, but are they reacting because of something we did? Because that's highly likely. China may react hostilely.
I'll tell you right now, Russia is not innocent.
And no. But there's no innocent country. But who are we to? Are we basing our logic off of innocence and not innocent? Because that doesn't work for us. Are we trying to base it off of, do we truly want peace? And if that's the case, we have to figure out the first obstacle to achieving that peace. And Absolutely. At that point, it's indisputably the country with the largest military budget in the world, with the most military bases in the world, and the countries that have been known to falsify intelligence merely to have an excuse to take out economic allies. And so that's why, that's all I mean by just diagnosing the problem correctly, is that we can't even really begin to explore the hostilities of other nations and trying to pretend like they're not reacting to something. Largely, it seems that they're reacting, at least in the last 50 years, to us. And so if you end up in Congress, that is something that you're going to be presented with, which is why I asked the question. They're going to, can we deflect blame? Can we deflect accountability? Because that's what we've always done. We've still not addressed the election fraud that took place in the Democratic primary of 2016. We still haven't addressed election fraud that took place in the Democratic primary of 2020. For all the issues with the Republican Party, they didn't have margin of errors that were ridiculous when we're talking about the exit polling, like to the point where it's not even, it's laughable that we even believe that we genuinely have an elected Democratic primary candidate, but yet we still are trying to pretend that there's only election integrity issues on one side of the aisle. I feel like that's incorrectly diagnosing, and I feel like that could lead to just more dangerous policies if we're not careful.
Well, we have a lot of suppression of the vote, and I think that's where people neglect to pay attention. Anything to suppress the vote is how corruption takes control. So if you don't if you're a primary candidate and you're running for office,
mm-hmm.
you have your voters that are looking at this ballot. Not all of the voters know how to fill in these ballots. They make it very confusing. If you mark off Democrat and you vote for a Republican, your ballot is now null and void. So most people in America identify as an independent. Mm-hmm. So I believe it's like 60% of
it's high.
Like
it's
voters
high,
are actually
probably higher than it's ever been, honestly. Yeah.
Yeah. And so you're telling, so what I get from that is we're all independent, so none of our votes actually matter, because you're filling out independent, but you can only vote for an independent.
Yeah.
You can't vote for whoever you want, but that's what people think.
You feel like it's too much, it's too exclusive. There's an exclusionary tactics that remove the majority's will.
There's no education in how to do it. So, and then there's also the suppressing of the vote based on, immigration and, minorities in their communities and not having access to ballots. So they suppress the vote to essentially keep those cronies in power.
Yeah, that's true. 100%.
Because, and so by law, those ballots are null and void by law. So we need election interference, like legislation and reform, and that's why I proposed a blockchain voting and backup paper ballot voting. Tulsi has also done the same thing. Mm-hmm. I'm more of an advocate for digital blockchain because I believe that's more of a transparent, open network mm-hmm. for all people, where it can't be hacked and everyone can participate and see what's going on.
Well, it can be hacked, but if there was a hack, you would be able to track the hack. basically. That's the
Exactly,
benefit of it. Yeah.
because it's encrypted. So it's everything can be tracked, and that's what we need is accountability. And so that's what I'm going to propose is a blockchain voting system. They are experimenting with blockchain technology, so within our military and within Congress and stuff. So hopefully we'll be able to see those programs roll out, be successful, and maybe we can implement it into our election. And that's how we can secure the vote and stop the voter suppression. But really, the voter suppression comes from lack of knowledge. And I'm a strong advocate for creating an ethics and voting course for education curriculum. So I believe every senior should have a voting a class on how to vote elections and such.
That's actually a really, really good idea. I believe that we should have a class for taxes, voter education, things like
Absolutely.
that. 100% agree. All right. Well, I appreciate you coming on the show. Let everybody know where they can find you if they want to donate to your campaign, follow you on any social media, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, if you guys want to join the campaign, go to electnoelle.com, and you can find me on Twitter and Instagram at electnoelle and Noelle for Congress on Facebook.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us on the show. Thank you all so much for tuning in. And always remember, more than anything else, people, find your balance. Peace.